to the demand response workshop website. Let me know if you have any questions, and Zicheng will help you if you have any technical issues. Just have a quick safety check around you. Just as a reminder, everyone should be muted at the beginning of the workshop. If you have any questions, please use the raise your hand function and unmute yourself. When we call on you, we will have a Q&A portion at the end of every presentation. So if you could please wait until then to raise your hand, or if you'd like to put your questions in the chat and they can be answered there. And I will read aloud your questions if they are put in the chat. And just a reminder to mute yourself after you've unmuted. Just some basic ground rules. We just want this workshop to allow the utilities to present their results and engage in questions on how they got to those results. So we just want to keep our questions friendly and respectful. And please just keep the chat only for questions or things pertaining to the workshop. Okay, so we'll start off day 2 with our base interruptible programs with all utilities, and then our capacity bidding programs for all utilities. And then finally, we'll end our day with Southern California Edison's Smart Energy Program. Oh, sorry. All right, so I think we will get started with our base interruptible program presenter if they would like to share their screen.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Michael. I am going to be presenting for BIP, or the Base Interruptible Program. So yeah, as we go through, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I have it open, so I'll do my best to answer things as we go along. But again, there will be time for questions at the end if you have anything that comes up. So I've been working on BIP for 3 years, so I'm definitely very happy to be back. So yeah. Without further ado, let's get into it. So this is just a brief outline of what we'll be talking about today. I'll talk a little bit about the program at a high level, and then we'll talk about ex post, including our methodology and our load impacts. And then we'll go into ex ante, which will include a discussion of our methodology, our enrollment forecasts, and then our forecast. And then finally, we'll do some reconciliations or some comparisons between ex ante and our ex post results. So BIP, for anyone who hasn't seen this program before, is an emergency demand response program for non-residential customers. The events are triggered by CAISO or local system emergencies. Customers receive a monthly capacity credit in exchange for reducing their consumption down to their firm service level, or what we call the FSL. And this is generally going to represent the customer's minimal operational requirements. It's going to differ for every customer based on what they decide with the utility that they're working with. Customers can have different notifications or notice of event start times. It's usually 15, 20, or 30 minutes, depending on the utility and the program that they sign up for. And if customers fail to reduce their energy to their FSL, they can either get excess energy charges, an increase in the FSL, which would then lead to a reduction in the capacity credits they're getting paid. Maybe they have to go through retest events, or even potentially de-enrollment from the program if they're not complying. But it is going to just vary by utility, and we'll see a little bit of this later as we go through the discussion. So moving on to ex post, we have done the same methodology for a while now for BIP. We use individual customer-specific regressions as opposed to some of the programs yesterday that use, for example, panel models or matching methods. The reason we use individual customer regressions for BIP is because, first of all, there's only a very few customers on the program. There are, I think, 600 give or take customers enrolled across the 2 utilities that participate. Which means it's going to be kind of difficult to find control group customers when you have that small of a sample size, particularly because the customers who are enrolled in BIP are large, customers who are businesses, they're industrial, agricultural, whatever, and so they have very volatile, kind of unusual load patterns. So even if we were able to find a reasonable match, maybe on aggregate, there's a pretty good chance that on any given day we wouldn't really see comparable loads between our BIP customers and other customers outside of the program. So it's really hard to do matching or other methodologies. So we use individual customer regressions. And this is actually nice because it allows us to basically choose the weather and shape variables that are the best for customers specifically. So we do a specification search where we determine whether customers are weather sensitive, so whether they're responding to heat. And then we find the best fitting weather and shape variables by groups, and we define groups by industry groups and weather sensitivity because there tends to be some sort of correlation in the variables that work well for customers based on their groups. So even though we do look to see whether customers are weather sensitive or not, it tends to be that BIP customers are not very weather sensitive. There are always a few customers who are, but generally the largest customers tend not to have very weather sensitive effects. So we don't see a lot of variation in the program based on whether the event days are particularly hot or particularly cold. We do see some swings back and forth, and you'll see a little bit of that in our ex-ante forecasts. But yeah, in general, it's not a very weather sensitive program. It's also very top heavy, so the biggest customers typically make up a vast majority of the response. So the program is very sensitive to how the biggest customers are performing and whether they remain in the program or leave, or whether big customers are added. We do see a lot of variation by day of the week. So particularly there's a big difference between weekdays and weekends. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have a lot of business customers who are enrolled in BIP. So when we do have weekend events, we will use separate weekend specifications. We didn't have any this year. We did have one last year. So if you were here last year, you might remember that. But since we didn't have any weekend events this year, we didn't have to use any separate regression specifications for the weekend events. So these were the three events or these are the events that were called this year, sorry. They both SCE and PG&E called events on July 20th, which was a Thursday. PG&E and SCEs were called as transmission emergencies. PG&E's lasted from 8:27 to 8:32 p.m., which is only 5 minutes. And then SCE's event lasted for 34 minutes from 7:45 to 8:19 p.m. PG&E also called two retest events from 4 to 6 p.m., one on September 26th and one on October 24th. These were for customers who hadn't been called to the event on July 20th because most of the program was called on July 20th for PG&E, but it was 214 out of 249 customers. So there were some customers who weren't called to that event, and they were called to retest events on September 26th and October 24th. And 14 and 6 customers were called to those events respectively. So a relatively small percentage of the program. So this is normally where I would jump into looking at the results from our ex-post impacts, but because there were some differences this year when we look at the events that took place when compared to years past, I do want to give some brief notes before we kind of get into things because they are going to look a little bit different. So like I said, PG&E did call two retest events that were 2 hours in length, but they were a pretty small fraction of the program, so it's hard to look at that as an adequate measure of program performance. So, we generally look at the events that have either the full, program called or at least most of the program called, which would be July 20th for the two utilities. But for both of these utilities, the events were shorter than an hour. So PG&E's was 5 minutes, and like I said, SCE's was 34 minutes. And this poses a little bit of a problem because our ex-post evaluations are conducted using hourly data. And since load impacts are not expected to occur during the full hour, we wouldn't necessarily expect to see our measure of performance, which is our FSL achievement rate, to be at the standard it normally is, which is generally pretty close to 100%. It's going to be artificially low because customers are only responding for part of that hour. I guess normally what ends up being a question is what is FSL achievement rate? So for anyone who hasn't seen it before, or people who maybe want a refresher, the FSL achievement rate is just measuring how close customers get from their reference load down to their FSL. And so the calculation is load impact divided by reference load minus FSL. But maybe the easiest way to think about it is if you have a customer who's using 10 megawatts and their FSL is 5 megawatts and an event gets called, if they were to get all the way down to 5 megawatts, their FSL achievement rate would be 100%. If they were to only get down to 7.5 megawatts, it would be 50% because they're getting halfway between their reference load and their FSL. And so the reason that's going to be artificially low when we have a partial event hour is because when you have hourly data, what that is a measure of is the measure of consumption averaged over the full hour. And so if a customer, we'll take the 10 megawatt customer that I just described, if they are using 5 megawatts for half the hour and 10 megawatts for the other half the hour, their hourly usage is going to be 7.5 megawatts because it's their usage average over the full hour. So when you try and look at their impacts, their FSL achievement rate is going to be artificially low because you're averaging their usage over the full hour. And again, if they're not responding for a full hour, their usage will be kind of pulled up by that non-event window that takes place in the same hour. So we were able to get 15-minute data from the utilities, both SCE and PG&E. So we were able to examine the performance of customers over 15-minute intervals. So SCE had intervals from 7:45 to 8, 8 to 8:15, and 8:15 to 8:30, although that 8:15 to 8:30 interval, only 4 minutes of that interval were actually event. And the way SCE has indicated their program works is when they say an event starts, so at 7:45 in this case, customers are notified. And then depending whether your customer was a 15-minute notification or a 30-minute notification, you have that long until you are expected to be down at your FSL. So the customers who are on the 15-minute notification program have until 8 p.m. to start responding or to be fully responding, and customers on the 30-minute have until 8:15 to be fully responding. So what this means is, during the first 15-minute interval, no one is expected to be fully responding. During the second interval, 15-minute customers are expected to be fully responding, and then everyone's expected to be fully responding by 8:15, which means there's really only a 4-minute window where we would expect the full program to be responding that we have data for. And again, that's going to, kind of suffer from some of the same effects as I just described, which is when you have only a partial 4-minute window of 15-minute data, those results are going to look a little bit artificially low. And it's a similar story for PG&E. They had, again, 5 minutes that took place over two 15-minute windows, 8:27 to 8:30, and then 8:30 to 8:32. And so FSL achievement, again, is going to be artificially low because, within those 15-minute intervals, you only have customers responding for a small fraction of those intervals. PG&E's program does work a little differently than SCE's. They notify customers 30 minutes before what they say is the event start window, and then customers are required to be fully responding by the time the event starts or they face excess energy charges. So that's a lot of information, a lot of text. It will probably be a little bit more visually clear on the next slides. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat about how things were different. So this is what PG&E's event day looks like. Just a little bit of orientation before I start out. The figure on the top left is how we typically report our results, but we've made a little bit of an adjustment this year to incorporate the fact that we are doing some 15-minute analysis to kind of examine things at a more granular level. The blue line at the top of the figure, I don't know if people can see my mouse, maybe not because I'm just sharing a window, but the blue line at the top of the figure is going to be the customer's reference load, which is what we're estimating with our regressions. The orange line is going to be the hourly observed load, which is what we would normally use to look at performance. The black dash line is going to be the 15-minute data that we got. Oh, okay, cool. So I can't see my cursor. Yeah, this black dash line is going to be the 15-minute observed load. The green line is going to be the load impact or estimated load impact at the hourly level, and then the yellow line is the FSL. This figure is for the program on aggregate. And then we have a table at the bottom that's basically showing the same thing, but in table format. So, you have reference load, hourly observed load, 15-minute observed load, and then hourly and 15-minute FSL achievement rates. And the reason we did this is to look at how things kind of differ when we look at a more granular level. The other thing you'll note is that this is all presented in megawatt hours per 15 minutes. Usually we report results in megawatt hours per hour. So if you're maybe, we get later in the presentation and you look at the ex-ante results and you go, why are these numbers so far apart? It's because in order to kind of translate these results into hours, you would just need to multiply all these numbers by 4. So getting to the event itself, you can see that the event covered, like I said, two partial 15-minute intervals and, was during one specific hour. During that 1 hour, if we were to use hourly data, you'd calculate the hourly FSL achievement rate to be 31%, which is definitely much lower than we would usually see. When you look at a 15-minute level with more granular data, you do see a larger evidence of response. So you can see the FSL achievement rate is a little bit lower during the first 3-minute partial window, but it gets to 47% from 8:30 to 8:45, and actually ends up being 55% from 8:45 to 9 after the event's already ended. This is something that we've seen with BIP in the past, is there's sort of this persistence effect because it takes customers a while to turn their energy back on, or sometimes customers even stay closed. But I do want to make it very clear that, it's really hard to tell how customers actually responded, because even when we have 15-minute data, that's still not really granular enough to examine just the event. So while we do see at the 15-minute window, there is more evidence of response than at the hourly window, which is, what we would expect. It's pretty hard to draw conclusions about whether customers were actually reaching their FSL, because again, we're trying to average their consumption over a much longer window than they're actually responding to the event. So this is SCE's event, and it was a little bit longer, so it was 34 minutes, and that covers, again, three 15-minute intervals. They did call their entire program, so it was all 351 customers. Again, this is all kind of the same format. Everything's reported in megawatt hours per 15 minutes. So again, to get, our results, you would want to basically multiply these numbers by 4. You can see during that first 15-minute window, when no one's fully expecting to be responding, you have a 15-minute FSL achievement rate of 66%, which is, considering not everyone's fully expecting to be responding, that's pretty in line with what we've seen in the past. Then in the 8 to 8:15 window, when only the 30-minute customers would be expecting to be fully responded, or sorry, only the 15-minute customers would be expecting to be fully responding, we see a 78% FSL achievement rate, and then a 73% 15-minute FSL achievement rate during that last partial window when everyone's expecting to be responding, but again, it's only 4 minutes out of that 15-minute window. So again, we don't necessarily have granular enough data to tell whether everyone's down fully responding during that time window. And you can definitely see that there is, more evidence of full response when we look at a more granular level, but due to the nature of how the program is called for SCE, and again, some data limitations, it's a little hard to know how customers were responding when they were all fully required to respond, just because we don't have that level of 1-minute data for, an extended period past when everyone is fully expected to be complying with the program. And then SDG&E, you might have noticed they didn't call any events. Their program was shut down as of last year, so it is over. So we don't have anything for them. But that is ex post. I guess I know it's a little bit different than it is normally, but I do want to stop and see if there are any questions before I move into ex ante. I know it's a lot of talking and figures, so if you have any questions, feel free to jump in now before I move on. Yeah, Andrew?
Basically, my only question is, I know we have new ex post data from this year, but for our ex ante, you're still using a few years of ex post data, correct?
Sure, yeah. So I'll talk about how we do ex ante in a second, and we'll get to that.
Okay, perfect. I'm excited.
Yeah. So here's how we do ex ante. First thing we do is all the customers who are leaving BIP are not included in our forecast, so we remove them because they will not be informing, how the program works in the future. And then we simulate reference loads in a pretty similar process to how we do an ex post, which is we take customer-specific regressions and we look at the effects of weather and time period indicators on their usage. So we get a set of scenarios for ex ante, which is day types and weather conditions. So we have differing month days, and then we also have utility and Kaizo specific 1 in 2 and 1 in 10 weather scenarios. Again, the biggest responders tend not to have weather sensitive loads, so we don't see a lot of effect for the program based on weather variables, but we do see effects on, different month types. And then also, you can see differing effects based on day of the week if we were to vary those as well. And so what we do for ex ante is we have our load impacts, which are based on the most recent full or test M&E event day for which the customer's reference load was above their FSL. Now, because of all of the data limitations that I just discussed and the fact that the events this year were pretty unusual in terms of their shortness, we decided that this was not going to be an appropriate way to kind of measure how customers would perform in the future, because our ex ante RA window is going to last over 5 hours. So it's more appropriate to look at how customers have responded during full hour events when we, have full hourly level data instead of trying to stitch partial hour data into full hour ex ante forecast. So what we do is we took the 2022 typical event day, which is September 6th of 2022 last year, for both PG&E and SCE, and we use that as our basis for ex ante, or to the extent that customers weren't around on that event day, we would use whatever their most recent full event day was. Because again, our 2023 events are not necessarily representative of how customers would perform over a longer window. And again, we just don't have full data to actually try and take those results and impose them on ex ante. So the way we get our ex ante load impacts for customers is we take their ex post FSL achievement rate, and this is what I was talking about earlier, which is just their ex post load impact divided by the reference load minus their FSL. You can kind of see a pretty good visual illustration of what I mean here. So, this blue line is their reference load, and a customer who was to get all the way down to their yellow line would be 100% FSL achievement rate. Customers could actually go over 100% FSL achievement rate, which we've definitely seen in the past. And we take that percentage and we apply it to their ex ante reference loads, which again, we build using regressions. So if a customer is to increase their reference load, we would assume that their load impact would be proportionally the same based on their ex post FSL achievement rate, but with a larger reference load in the future. Just some brief notes: if a customer has a FSL at or above their reference load, then we'll assume that their load impact is 0. We don't let customers go negative. We also have customers who join BIP and leave BIP every year, so there's some program churn. Like I said, the customers who leave BIP get dropped from the analysis in its entirety. The customer who joined BIP, we give them the program level FSL achievement rate on average, and we apply that to each customer's reference loads in their FSL if it's available. Sometimes we'll have customers who we don't have data for, maybe they're just new to the utility in general. So what we'll do is we will assign them the program average reference load and FSL. Typically, customers who join and leave the program are smaller on average. So what we see is sometimes when we scale to new customers we don't have any data for, that will affect the results. It will pull them up a little bit because we're assigning a program average for customers who may not actually end up being program average once we actually have data for them. And then again, load impacts typically display little to no relationship with weather conditions. So this is the enrollment forecast that we got from the utilities this year. PG&E is forecasting, increased enrollment. So I think there are like 191 customers enrolled in the program right now. This table shows August enrollment for each year of the forecast. And so by August of 2024, PG&E forecasts 195 customers to be enrolled. And then they forecast that to be scaled by about 5% every year, which ultimately goes, progressively increases until we get to 323 customers forecasted to be enrolled in 2034. SCE is forecasting flat enrollment for both their 15 and 30-minute notification program. They have 325 customers enrolled in the program. 41 of those are on their 15-minute program, and 284 are enrolled in their 30-minute program. So these are some charts that show the results and how they vary both by weather scenario and then also over the course of our forecast window. So starting out with PG&E in 2024, again, there's 195 customers forecast to be enrolled by August, with a FSL or an aggregate FSL of 50 megawatts. The load impact in the 1 and 2 weather scenario is forecast to be 144 megawatts, and in the 1 and 10 weather scenario, it's 145 megawatts. So you can see the difference of 6 degrees is pretty negligible. It's 1 out of 144 megawatts, which is less than 1% of the program in total, and that's pretty standard for BIP. By 2034, when we forecast 323 customers to be enrolled, we forecast the FSL to be at about 83 megawatts, and then load impacts to be at 243 megawatts in the 1 and 2 weather scenario, and 245 megawatts in the 1 and 10 weather scenario. Now, the vast majority of this is due to basically just more customers, right? Like as customers enter the program, you have more customers responding, and that contributes to the majority of the difference. There is a small increase in load impact in 2027 because PG&E indicated that the contract for ELRP ends in 2027, maybe renewed, may not be, but BIP customers are given 100% credit for their response to BIP. That's kind of the primary program. But the way we decided to do things for PG&E is customers who go above 100% FSL achievement rate, that extra is given credit to ELRP if they are duly enrolled. Once ELRP ends, though, we assume that that extra amount of response over 100% goes back to BIP. So there's like a 2 megawatt jump after 2027 where ELRP ends. But again, the vast majority of this increase over the 10-year forecast is due to an increase in the forecast customers enrolled. For SCE, there are 325 customers enrolled. The load impact in the 1 and 2 weather scenario is 417 megawatts, and in the 1 and 10 weather scenario, it's 420 megawatts, with an FSL of 170 megawatts. So again, it's not very weather sensitive. It's 3 megawatts out of 400 between the 2 weather scenarios. And again, that's less than 1% of the program in total. And you'll notice that the 2034 scenario is the exact same as the 2024 scenario, because again, there's not really any changes to the program because enrollments are expected to be the same over the course of 10 years. So these are just basically tables that show what I was talking about. SCE, again, because there's only, because there's no change over years, we just present what it looks like in 1 year. You can see, again, the incredibly negligible impact of different weather scenarios on the program. And PG&E, you can see how forecast results are expected to increase pretty steadily over the course of 10 years. Again, it's pretty much entirely due to an increase in forecast customers. Even though there is that little bump in ELRP, you basically can't even notice the effect between 2027 and 2028 in the figure. So that's kind of a summary of ex ante. I'm going to do some reconciliations, but again, I'm going to just give a brief notice, which is in the past, we've done it a little differently because we base our ex ante, or we've historically based our ex ante on whatever the typical event day is in the program year that we're in. So we would compare our current ex post to our current ex ante. We'd also compare our previous ex post to our current ex post as part of our reconciliations. But again, because of data availability, it doesn't really make any sense for us to do that. It would be at best an apples to oranges comparison, but realistically, like again, the results from our ex post this year aren't actually capturing full customer response. So I could put them in a table and show you the difference, but basically it would just boil down to we don't actually know, we don't have full data, and that's not a particularly informative thing to put in this presentation. So what we do is we compare our basis for our ex ante, which is last year's ex post, to our current ex ante, and then we're also going to compare last year's ex ante to our current ex ante from this year. So we'll start out with PG&E. Their ex post event last year, there were 258 customers enrolled. They were all called to the event on September 6th. They had an aggregate reference load of 203 megawatts and a load impact of 149 megawatts, which gives you an FSL achievement rate of 98%. Our ex ante forecast that we produced this year has, again, 195 customers enrolled with a reference load of 194 megawatts and a load impact of 144 megawatts. which gives you an FSL achievement rate of 99%. So the big differences are largely going to be program churn, combined between the end of 2022 and the end of 2023, 30 new customers enrolled in the program. And since 2022, 93 customers have left the program. So we're down like 63 customers, I think, in total since the end of PY 2022. And a lot of them left after this program year. So this decrease in customer count is going to lead to lower aggregate reference load and load impacts. Again, that's pretty straightforward in how that works. But as I mentioned earlier, customers who leave and join tend to be smaller than average. So you'll notice that even though we're losing 63 customers, our forecast only calls for a reduction of like 9 megawatts and a load impact decrease of 5 megawatts because the customers that left typically are smaller and typically they tend to not be as high performers. So you actually oftentimes will see pretty small impacts on per customer reference load and and load impact, and you'll actually sometimes see increases in FSL achievement rates as the big customers who perform very well stay on the program year after year. Again, these are all based on PY 2022 because we didn't have a PY 2023 ex post event that had a full event hour. And then also something that occurs when we are taking our ex post events and applying them to ex ante is, our ex post events for BIP typically end up being shorter than the ex ante window, the ex ante RA window. So the ex ante RA window is from hour ending 17 to 21, which is 5 full hours. Our ex post events, even when we have longer events for BIP, typically don't last more than 2 or 3 hours. And so what we do is we take the FSL achievement rate from individual hours in ex post and we apply that to ex ante. So we take the first ex post event hour and apply that to the first hour of ex ante, and then we'll take the second ex post event hour and then we'll apply that to the remaining hours of ex ante, even though we don't actually expect events in the future in BIP to last the full RA window. And so what ends up happening is because in most years we see some evidence, and it depends a little bit on the year and the program and the circumstances surrounding the event, but usually we see slightly lower impacts in the first full event hour for BIP. And then we see a little bit higher impacts in the second full event hour. What ends up happening is when you take that second full event hour and you apply that to 4 event hours in the ex ante RA window, that actually brings the ex ante FSL achievement rate up slightly. So sometimes you'll see slightly higher impacts and FSL achievement rates in ex ante than maybe in ex post, and that's because we're applying higher impacts from the end of ex post to a longer window in ex ante. This is a comparison of our previous ex ante forecast versus our current ex ante forecast. So last year we had 240 customers forecast to be enrolled in the program with a reference load of 231 megawatts and a load impact of 169 megawatts. You can also see per customer reference and load impacts presented in kW, not megawatts. This year, again, 195 customers with 194 megawatt load impact, 194 megawatt reference load and 144 megawatt load impact. So the big takeaways here are reference load and load impact are expected to decrease by 37 and 25 megawatts respectively from our last year to our current ex ante. The majority of this is due to the enrollment forecast decreasing by 45 customers. Again, as customers leave, they take impacts with them. The FSL does decrease, which does indicate that we would have slightly higher load impact. But again, if customers are just leaving and taking FSL with them, it doesn't necessarily always mean that. The FSL achievement rate does increase because, again, customers who are high performing and larger stay on the program. So you can see the per customer reference load and load impact actually are higher because, again, high performers stay. We also had a couple of very large customers join the program after 2022, which is why you see some kind of higher per customer reference load and load impacts. So now we'll talk a little bit about SCE and do their reconciliations. Last year, they had 343 customers enrolled in their ex post event on September 6th, which is a 590 megawatt reference load and a 463 megawatt load impact with an FSL of 122 megawatts and a 99% FSL achievement rate. So some changes 35 new customers have enrolled since 2022, and 53 customers in total have de-enrolled since the end of PY 2022. You see that the ex-ante FSL achievement rate is higher than ex-post because, again, we have some lower performing customers leave the program. And higher FSL, and I guess the big story for SCE is that a handful of customers increased their FSL very substantively after 2023. So the aggregate program FSL goes up by 48 megawatts. And so that means that you're going to see basically there's more that goes into it than just this, but just kind of like the ad hoc calculation is if customers increase their FSL by 48 megawatts, you would expect to then see a 48 megawatt decrease in total program load impacts. And you can see basically that, right? You see that even though the reference load doesn't go down by very much, it goes down by 5 megawatts. You see a pretty significant decrease in the program load impact because customers are forecast to increase their FSL, which means that they are not obligated to respond as much to the events in the future. And again, we have kind of the same effect where we have a longer ex-ante RA window, so you're going to see slightly higher ex-post FSL or ex-ante FSL achievement rates than you would in our ex-post analysis. Comparing last year's ex-ante forecast and this year's, there's a decrease of 7 customers, a decrease in reference load from 611 megawatts to 585, which is a 26 megawatt difference, and then an 83 megawatt decrease in load impact. And again, this is largely driven by the 52 megawatt decrease in the FSL. So you have a 52 megawatt increase in the FSL, excuse me, and then you have that sort of 26 megawatt increase or decrease in the reference load. And so this is basically going to make up the vast majority of that 83 megawatt difference in the total load impact. You can see per customer reference loads do decrease a little bit. We had a couple of big customers who did leave the program this year, or larger than average customers who left the program. And then per customer load impact decreases. And again, this is largely due to a few main customers who have increased their FSL and therefore decreased their obligations to the program, which brings down the total program average load impact because, again, BIP is a very top-heavy customer or top-heavy program and is very sensitive to large customers changing their usage patterns, FSLs, or even leaving the program. So that is all I have for the presentation. I guess I will now open it up to questions about anything that I've said for the last 40 minutes.
Does anyone have any questions?
All right. Well, quiet morning today, but thank you. Oh, all right. Someone, yes, David.
David?
I don't know if you're muted or you're typing, but
yeah, I was just my unmute was just enabled. This is Dan from Energy Division. I think you might have said something about this, but I missed it. The current year enrollment that you have in BIP for SCE and PG&E, what is the when was that snapshot taken? Because as you probably know, there was an exceptional disenrollment period outside of the November ordinary disenrollment period that was ordered in decision 23-12-5, and I'm just wondering if the projections for 2024 have that churn during January baked in.
Yeah, so all of our enrollment forecasts were built after that second de-enrollment period ended. So I think as of the last time we talked with PG&E about it, it was like maybe in March when they had 191 customers enrolled in the program, and then the 325 customer number for SCE also was around that same time. So our enrollment forecast is built off of data that comes post the post second de-enrollment window. Thought I saw maybe another question or someone with their hand raised.
I think David had his hand raised. David, did you have a question? Oh, he seems to have dropped out. I think, unless anyone else has a question, we can move on.
All right. Well, yeah, I guess thank you all for listening. If you do have any more questions, though, feel free to get in touch if anything does come up later, yeah. So thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. If we could have the presenter for the capacity bidding program share their screen, please.
Hello, that'll be for me. Just give me 1 second. I'll go ahead, share my screen. Okay. Sorry, I'll have to move my Teams onto another screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shijun Zhang. I'm the associate consultant at AEG and also the project manager for the PY 2023 loading pack evaluation for the statewide capacity bidding programs. So today I'm here to present the results and findings of our analysis. Here's the agenda for this presentation. I will start with an overview of the program description and program offered by each IOU in 2023. So following that, I will talk about the monthly nominations, dispatch summaries, as well as ex post loading pack assessment covering PG&E and SDG&E's non-residential programs. After that, I will discuss XNT forecast assumptions and XNT loading packs, which will also cover PG&E's residential CBP program, in addition to the programs covered in the ex post. For SCE this year, their ex post and XNT data for 2024 are confidential. So instead for SCE, I will present some changes to their CBP programs for the next year and for 2025 and afterwards. At the end, I will also highlight some summaries of the statewide key findings. Okay, now let's move on to the program description. So CPUC is an aggregator-managed event-based demand response program. Aggregator has and it's covered by all 3 IOUs in California. Aggregators have the flexibility to nominate a customer service account into the product offerings by each IOU, and the terms and conditions of the service can vary widely depending on the IOU specific tariff plus the contracts between aggregators and the customers. So in this presentation and also throughout our reporting, we define program as the IOU plus customer class and plus notification type. So for example, PG&E, they have non-residential day-ahead program and also residential day-ahead program. So those 2 are separate programs. For each IOU's program, they vary slightly from each other, but at a very high level, aggregators will receive monthly payment as well as energy payment based on their energy reduction during the events. So, and also the capacity payment will be adjusted based on their performance. If there's no event are dispatched within a specific month, the customer will receive the full monthly capacity payment based on their nominations. Okay. This slide represents the program offering by each IOU. So in 2023, PG&E and SCE maintained their program design from the previous year. SDG&E offered 6 distinct products and is entering the 2nd year of their introduction of the price trigger products. All 3 IOUs provided offerings for both residential and non-residential customers. PG&E had residential enrollment in 2023. SCE's residential program is under a separate evaluation, so it's not covered in this presentation. And since 2021, SCE's residential has been opened for enrollment, but we haven't received any since then. For the other thing is for PG&E and SDG&E, the CBP program are summer-only programs, but for SCE, their CBP operates year-round. Each of the 3 IOU, they have slightly different dispatch windows, event duration, as well as the limitation on the number of event days and number of event hours can be called within each month. The other thing is 2023 is the last year for PG&E and SDG&E to offer their prescribed options. Again, for PG&E's residential ex post and all SCE CBP are confidential, so they're not included in here. Okay, now let's dive into our ex post analysis for this program year. Here is an overview of our ex post approach. On the left-hand side is a workflow, summarize the steps, and on the right-hand side is a bit of the details of what we do for each step. Since the ex post in this presentation includes only the non-residential programs, I will be focusing on the non-res part. So the first thing is we collect and validate all the data we received, and we will assemble our regression data sets. After that, we would select our event-like days, which will be very similar to the event days, but without any events being called, very similar in terms of the temperature. We use the selected event-like day as another layer into our baseline estimation, as well as supporting our out-of-sample testing. We use Euclidean distance matching to select event-like days. Depending on the number of events that are called by each IOU, we would select with replacement or without replacement, depending on which one is more appropriate for each IOU. So after that, we would move on to our modeling process. For the commercial customer, we do customer-specific models. So for each customer and each hour, we would run through a list of candidate models. We call it our model optimization process. And then we do our in-sample and out-of-sample testing. In-sample testing on the event days and out-of-sample testing is withhold event-like days when we run the model, but we test on the event-like days. And then we will look at the fit for each model and determine which one is the best model for each customer to move forward, get our ex post estimates. At the end, we use a bottom-up approach where we get individual level impacts, and then we aggregate them into the required reporting segments. Okay, now let's move on to the PG&E ex post. This slide gives an overview of the summer nominations for PG&E's non-residential DA program. So the top table presents the monthly customer counts and the corresponding capacity nomination megawatts. For the non-residential DA, customers were nominated every month throughout the summer, where August had the highest customer counts of 790 customers. July had the highest megawatt nominations. And also May and June, which are the beginning of the season, had relatively lower nominations, which led to 672 and 33, 672 customers, 33.9 megawatts on average summer. The pie chart to the right shows the distribution of non-residential customers by their size and the industry type. So in 2023, over 50% of the customer are a combination of retail, medium retail, and medium agriculture. Following that is the large agriculture, which is 11% of the total enrollment. The bar chart to the left is a comparison of average summer nominations across years. Okay, the orange dots represent the customer counts, and the bar represents the megawatt. So we're seeing a downward trend in the non-residential in both their customer counts and nomination megawatt since 2021. The customer counts comparing to last year, on average summer, the enrolled customer counts dropped slightly, and the megawatt nomination dropped about 15 megawatts. Now let's look at the event dispatch and expose impact. The table to the top left shows the total number of days and total event hours called in 2023. For PG&E's non-residential DA, the events were only called in August and October. In August events, multiple event windows were called, resulting in 7 unique event hours. There was only 1 dispatch window was called during the single event day in October. The histogram at the top right is showing a distribution of the hours being called across all dispatches. So hour ending 19 is the most frequently called hour, and we've also selected that hour as the reporting hour for our average event day. Next, we will look at the chart at the bottom, where the orange dots are represent the total nominated customer counts in each month. The purple dots are the actual dispatched number of customers. So in August, the majority of the nominated customers were dispatched, but in October, there was only 19 out of 601 nominated customers that were dispatched. The 2 blue bars represents the nominated megawatt and dispatched megawatt. So in August, those 2 bars are about the same height, and in October, we're seeing some differences, which is also reflecting in the customer counts. So finally, the blue line is our ex-post estimates at the monthly level. So to assess the program's performance at the monthly level, we would compare the position of that line to the bars. So the August event, it's pretty close. The line is pretty close to the top of the second blue bar, which is giving us 86% of the delivered capacity, total dispatched capacity. The October event, even though there were only 19 customers being dispatched, they were performing very well, and they reached 96% delivery. Okay, this slide represents the average event day impact of the PG&E's non-residential CBP in 2023. So across the 2023 season, on an average event day, PG&E dispatched 430 customers. Hour ending 19 is the most frequently called hour, which also has the highest impact, showing in the line chart to the right. During that hour, the aggregate impact is at 20.5 megawatt. The percent impact is about 22%. The highest impact happened on August 15, hour ending 20, where PG&E dispatched 629 customers. The aggregate impact is at 29.8 megawatt, and percent impact is at 23%. The one thing to point out is in 2023, PG&E and the CAISO system peak overlapped, which is on August 16, hour ending 18. PG&E dispatched 641 customer, 20 megawatt in impact. Even though the 14% impact seems a little low, that is because the major dispatch was on that day was during hour ending 19 through hour ending 20, which involved PG&E's Elect 124 with weekend option products. So if we look at the percent impact for those 2 hours, the highest percent impact we're seeing is at 24%. So lastly, the smaller table on the left-hand side is showing the performance on the average event day. We use 2 ratios to look at the performance. So the first is the percent achievement, which is the proportion of dispatched megawatt to the total nominated megawatt, where we're seeing a 90% achievement rate. And the second is we look at the percent delivery, which is the proportion of exposed impact to the total dispatched megawatt. We're seeing 86% delivery. So we focus on the percent delivery to measure how the program is performing, but we do incorporate both of these ratios into our XNT assumptions. Okay. Here's ex-post comparison slide, which only includes PG&E's non-residential day-ahead program. So the top line chart is a quick view of the program's performance on the average event day over time. In 2023, we're seeing 86% delivery performance, which is pretty comparable to what we saw last year, even with a little bit less customer being dispatched on an average event day. It is lower than what we saw in 2021. 2021 was one of the best year, based on their performance, but still 2023 is better than what we saw in 2020. The table below is a bit of details of the comparison. So again, in 2023, we're seeing slightly less enrollment on dispatched customers on the average event day, but the performance percent delivery is pretty close. And the other thing is, if we look at the per customer reference load, 2023 have slightly larger customers that are being dispatched. One of the reasons is we're seeing a few very large. Sorry, I'm trying to. We're seeing a few very large manufacturing and school customers in 2023. And also, based on the performance, agriculture, mining, and construction customer are one of the main contributor to the load reduction this year. The other thing is there was a smaller number of wholesale, transport, and other utility customers, and they also, even they're smaller, they also had pretty significant impacts this year. Those two groups were able to reduce half of their usage during some of the events. And this might explain why the percent delivery is pretty close to last year, even with less customers. Okay, the next part we'll talk about PG&E's XNT load impact, which will cover both their non-residential and the residential DA programs. This slide has the same setup as our ex-post approach slide. On the left side, we have outlined our XNT steps. The first, we would collaborate with IOU to develop XNT assumptions, forecast assumptions. Following that, we would adjust the finalized ex-post impact based on the weather scenarios and also incorporate the enrollment forecast. Like the ex-post method, our XNT adopts a bottom-up approach, which impacts are assessed at the customer level before being aggregated into segments. Moving to the right-hand side, we begin with forecast assumptions for PG&E. We started a raw forecast of 65 megawatt for the non-residential DA and 1 megawatt for the residential DA for their August peak day. And then we applied the achievement rate and the delivery rate of 90% and 86% for the non-residential customers. For the residential side, since it's still a pretty new program, we applied a delivery rate of 61%, which is reflecting the program's minimum threshold for customer to receive incentives based on PG&E's tariff. Addition to that, we assumed a consistent forecast from 2024 through 2034. For the per customer XNT impact, we assumed the maximum impact during the dispatched window in ex-post for each customer, which represents the potential amount that each customer can curtail. And after that, we extend the highest 1 hour impact to the 5 hour RA window. As PG&E hasn't historically called any 5-hour events. We assumed 0 impact for the last hour and applied an impact degradation rate to get the impact for hour 1 through 4, where there will be only 1 hour that is close to the highest impact we saw in the ex post for each customer. After that, we calculate the average per customer impact aligned with the enrollment forecast breakdown that is provided us by PG&E, and then we applied enrollment forecast to get the final results. Okay, now we look at some XNT results. This slide is a forecast for the August peak day, which covers both residential and non-res. Residential is in orange, the non-residential is in blue. The left-hand side is the enrollment forecast, and the right-hand side is the megawatt impact forecast, including 2023 backcast, where we do the weather adjustment only without the day type adjustment and without applying any forecast. The impact forecast is showing the average 5-hour RA window impact, again with the assumption of last hour impact to be 0. From 2024 through 2034, we forecasted 1,100 customers and 39.9 average RA window impact for the non-residential DA on an August peak day. We also forecast 301,058 customer with 0.72 megawatt in impact for the residential DA program. Okay, here's the XNT comparison slide. Okay, the load shape is showing what the August peak day will look like in 2024 under PG&E's 1-in-2 weather scenario across the 5-hour RA window. As you can see, the last hour, which is our ending 21, has 0 impact, aligns with our assumption, and also the line chart including both residential and non-res. The table comparison only include the non-residential program because it involves the current ex post, where the residential ex post is confidential. So the current ex post estimates show average load impact for PY 2023 dispatched events, but the XNT estimates is showing the program, how the program would have performed in the 1-in-2 weather scenario for a system level dispatch. So for the comparison, we're seeing the 2023 participant had the potential to deliver over 41 megawatt if the market trigger a system level event. And also in the XNT, from the XNT comparison, that we can see higher per customer reference load in 2023. That is because in 2023 ex post, the average event day was able to dispatch larger customers across all customers that are involved. That's why the per customer reference load in the ex post part is a little bit higher than what we saw in the XNT. Okay. Here is my last slide in the XNT comparison, where we're trying to compare the current XNT to previous XNT, and trying to show how the program forecast has been updated since last year. On the residential side, the forecast was updated to account for higher enrollment, higher aggregate load impact, and higher per customer reference load, indicates larger customers. And the per customer impact stays about the same. On the non-residential side, the forecast has been updated to reflect a higher enrollment as well, larger customer size, larger per customer level impact, which also lead us to have a higher aggregate impact. Okay, now let's talk about SDG&E's program. The same setup as the PG&E slide For SCE, they have both non-residential day ahead and non-residential day of programs. Both programs received nomination for each month throughout the summer, with non-residential day ahead had the higher nominations towards the end of the season, which is in September and October. The non-residential day of program had pretty stable enrollment and nominations from July through October. The pie chart is showing in 2023, 74% of the enrolled customer are medium retail, which aligns with what we saw in previous years. And then we look at the average summer nominations by program year chart. We're seeing a large increase in the non-residential day ahead enrollment and a slightly drop in the non-residential day of program, especially compared since 2021. Yeah. SDG&E dispatched both programs in July and August. Both day ahead and day of 400 price trigger products were dispatched on the same day in both months. The day ahead 600 price trigger product was dispatched on 2 out of the 3 August event days. The histogram to the right is showing hour ending 20 is the most frequently called event hour for both programs. So we've selected hour ending 20 as the reporting hour for the average event day this year. The bottom chart is showing the nominated versus dispatched customer counts and megawatts for each program and each month, as well as the monthly ex post impact. For the non-residential day ahead, July events, we're able to dispatch 70 out of the 97 customers. The estimated ex post impact is at 1.2 megawatt, and it almost aligned with the dispatched 1.3 megawatt. Yeah, so it's almost at the top of the second bar chart for the non-residential DA side. The August event, we're able to dispatch all 104 nominated customers, but the delivery performance is a little bit lower at 22%. On the non-residential DO side, they performed very well in both July and August. 51 customers were dispatched out of 57 and 56 that are nominated. The ex post impact for average July event was at 1.8 megawatt, which is 100% of the dispatched capacity, which is also 1.8 megawatt. The average August event impact is at 1.6 megawatt, which achieved 91% delivery. So it's almost at the top of the second bar chart. Okay. Here's the average event day performance. So if we look at all CPP together, for SDG&E in 2023, their average event day were able to dispatch 135 customers. Hour ending 20 is the most frequently called hour, which also has the highest impact, showing in the line chart to the right. During that hour, we're seeing 2.5 megawatt in impact and 14% impact. One thing to point out is the highest impact happened on August 16th, hour ending 18, where we saw 4 megawatt in impact. The highest impact also happened during the system, CAISO system peak hour. That's why the two highlighted purple line are the same. And as DG&E were able to dispatch events from hour ending 18 through hour ending 21. The other thing is SDG&E system peak happened on August 28, hour ending 18, where they dispatched 121 customers and 0.3 in megawatt impact. One thing to point out is the actual dispatch on the SDG system peak day happened in our ending 19 through 20. So if we look at the impact for those 2 hours, we will see a much bigger impact. The performance table to the left, to the lower left, the percent achievement is 100%. So on the average event day, SDG&E was able to dispatch all nominated customers and capacity megawatt. The delivery performance is at 67%. Note that is due to the lower performance during the August DA events. But if we look at all other months, the performance and other programs, the performance were really good. Okay, here's the ex-post comparison slide. The DA, non-residential DA 2022 result is confidential, so it's not showing up here. As SDG&E entering their second year of implementing the price trigger products, the performance improved a lot. The non-residential DA average event day is at 42% delivery performance. Again, it is due to the August event performance at 22%. The July event performance is at 91%. But still, the performance is higher than what we saw in 2021. On the non-residential day off side, which 2023 reached the highest performance since 2020, where we're seeing 95% delivery, even with lower customer enrollment. The table comparison for the non-residential day ahead, we saw an increase in the enrollment, but with smaller per customer reference load, so smaller customer size, but we're seeing higher per customer impact, which also gave us higher aggregate load impact comparing to previous years. The non-residential DO side, there's a decrease in the enrollment and nominations, where we saw larger customer were involved with higher per customer impact, which give us higher aggregate load impact. Okay, the next part is covering the SDG&E's XNT. Okay, I'll just focus on the right-hand side where we start with the forecast assumptions. So we're expecting SDG&E's non-residential CBP to grow. We updated the growth rate from previous 2% to 3% for 2024 through 2027, and we assume there no growth after 2027. The other thing is starting in 2024, SDG&E will no longer be offering their CBP prescribed products. For the per customer level impact, we assumed ex-post reporting hour impact for each customer, which is our ending 20. And then we applied the weather adjustment to the impact and baselines. And then for the percent delivery assumption, we looked at what we had from 2020 through 2023, and then we decided to focus on the 2023 delivery performance because after implementing the new price trigger products, we're expecting the program moving forward will look like what we saw in 2023 at the program level. And again, we use a bottom-up approach from the individual level impact to aggregate impact and into the required customer segments. Here's the SDG&E's forecast for August peak day. The left-hand side is the enrollment forecast covering both their CBP day ahead and CBP day off programs. The right-hand side is the megawatt impact forecast, including a 2023 backcast. So from 2024 through 2027, we applied 3% growth rate every year for both products. And then for the impact forecast, we're showing the average 5-hour RA window impact, where we expecting for the CBP DO, will have 63 customers from 2027 through 2034 and 117 customers from the CBP DA program. On the impact side, from 2027 through 2024, we're expecting 1.9 megawatt in impact for the DO program and 0.9 megawatt for the CBP DA program. Here's the XNT comparisons. Again, the load shape shows what the August peak day would look like under the SDG&E's 1-in-2 weather scenario over the 5-hour RA window for both programs. The current ex-post estimates shows average load impact for the PY 2023 dispatched event, and again, the XNT is trying to show the program, what the program would perform under that weather scenario for a system level event. So from the table comparison, PY 2023 ex-post, the average event dispatched relatively larger customer across all enrolled customer for both programs. That is based off the per customer reference load. And for both programs, if SDG&E triggers a system level event, we'll be seeing higher aggregate load impacts. That is from the current XNT. Okay, if we compare current XNT to previous XNT, as SDG&E enters the second year of the new elect program with the price triggers, price trigger products, we observed improved performance in both day ahead and day of products as reflected in the 2023 forecast. So comparing to last year's forecast, 2020 forecast anticipates an increase in aggregate impact for both programs. For the non-residential day ahead, we're expecting a lot more enrollment with smaller customers, but a higher aggregate load impact. For the non-residential day of, we're expecting lower enrollment, but with larger customers, higher per customer impact and higher aggregate load impact. Okay, now let's move on to SCE's program. In this slide, I'm presenting some changes to SCE's CBP program for 2024 and for 2025 and afterwards. So 2024 will be the last year SCE is offering their original CBP prescribed program, which will convert into a summer-only program with day-ahead notifications only. And the dispatch window will be switched to 5 to 10 p.m. in May and 4 to 9 p.m. in other months to better align with the RA window. And also CBP will be available 7 days a week, with Sunday and holidays are the emergency dispatch only, and also without any monthly or hourly limitations. They've also updated to a T15 nomination window where the aggregators have a 15 days window to allow them to review performance and test data and then incorporate into their final nominations. The main point here is that starting in 2025, SCE will implement their new CBP Elect program, which will be a day-ahead notification type only and summer-only program. I don't have a lot of details here. The final proposal will be submitted in June 2024. Okay. Here is a very brief forecast for the SCE's August peak day from 2025 through 2034, which will be involving their new elect program. one thing I'd like to point out is SC had a very low enrollment in 2023, but their performance was still very good. SC was able to recruit a very large customer and is driving a lot of the loading packs this year. And then that is also one of the reasons that SCE's X-Post is confidential, is because the one customer constitutes more than 15% of the load comparing to the rest of the customers. And since the CBP Elect DA program will be new and starting in 2025, our XNT is adopting what we observed in 2023 with assumptions that the CBP program will grow due to two reasons. The first is the introduction of the new program will attract more customers. And the second is the suspension of DREM after 2024. We're expecting some customer will move to CBP from DREM. Okay, this is the last part of this presentation where I just highlighted some key findings. Okay, the first is this table only including PG&E and SDG&E's program because SCE is confidential. So PG&E non-residential DA and SDG&E both their non-residential DA and DO achieved very high percent achievement and very high percent delivery. PG&E's average non-residential delivery performance was at 86%, remains comparable to the previous years with lower participation but larger customer size. SDG&E showed significant improvements in both programs. The day ahead program reached a 42% delivery performance. Again, that was due to the lower performance in August events. The day off program achieved an impressive 95% delivery performance, both outperforming the previous years. Both programs. The total of PG&E and SDG&E non-residential program delivered about 25 megawatt impact in 2023 season. I only have one row for PG&E's residential program here, even though the impacts are confidential, but we're definitely seeing an increase in the enrollment after they were skipping the 2022 program year. Okay, here's the statewide XNT table. For XNT, we're expecting CBP to grow. PG&E has a flat forecast for 2024 through 2034. SDG&E's forecast, we forecast 3% increase for from 2024 through 2027 and flat afterwards. SCE's forecast is showing 2025 and afterwards only an expectation of more enrollments with the new Elect CBP program being introduced. Okay, here's our project team, and that's the end of my presentation. Sorry, I'll have to stop sharing for a second to bring back my teams.
Luke, you have a question?
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Any questions?
Luke has a question. I don't know if he's able to unmute.
I think he should be. 1 second.
Yeah, Luke,
Oh.
your mic has been enabled, so you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah. Okay.
Andrew, do you want to
Well,
ask your question then?
sure, while Luke is figuring that part out. My question is related to SDG&E's ex ante.
Okay.
Specifically, I'm curious about the load curve shape,
Okay.
where it seems that impacts are greatest in both the first and last hour, and then there is decreased performance in the middle. And I'm wondering if there is something in the model that might explain this shape.
Okay. I will share my screen again. So let me know if you're able to see it.
Yes, I can see.
Okay, so yes, that is after we applied our impact degradation. So the impact degradation is we use what we saw from previous years combined with what we saw in 2023 to develop the shape across the RA window. So so basically we take 1 hour from the ex post, which is the highest impact, which is the reporting hour impact for each customer, and then we applied that rate to degradation rate to build the shape. So this should align with what we saw before from SDG CBP program.
Yeah, I believe that this has been the shape the past couple of years as well. So I appreciate that consistency. I guess maybe it might be a question for SDG&E another time to see why load impacts may be increasing. There's like a degradation, and then there's that increase in hours ending 20 and 21. I think that's my only question for now.
Luke, do you want to put your question in the chat? If you're still unable to unmute, which I think you should be able to unmute by now.
Okay.
Okay. Did anyone else have any questions?
Do you think it may be worth actually making? Oh, Luke is leaving. Okay, I was gonna say make him maybe a presenter for a
Yeah,
little bit.
I was
Yeah,
trying
so
to make him a presenter. See if that helps.
Okay, so I just re-allowed Luke's mic and make a presenter.
Okay.
See if that helps. Okay, Luke, feel free to try unmuting again.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. I'm terribly sorry. This, I'm not particularly proficient at Teams. Jun, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name.
That's correct.
Oh, thank you, good. Are you on slide 33?
Okay. I see slide 33. Okay.
I don't necessarily expect a response from you, but I do want to make a point here. So I'm looking at the PG&E row here, and I'm seeing ex post analysis, impact 20.5 megawatts impact, and then 86% delivered. But ultimately, is it not true that that percent delivered is based on the amount that's dispatched? So is it relative to the 23.8 megawatts?
Yes.
Okay, so the point I want to make here, and this is, I wouldn't necessarily expect, you all to know this because, you're more statistically focused here, is that when we talk about nominations versus actual dispatches, in my opinion, the percent delivered should be based on what the actual nominations are, because, and folks will know that this is kind of a sore spot for the DR community in that, when we're looking at the performance of utility DR programs, they're not being compared to the amount of capacity, their dispatches relative to capacity. They're being dispatched to, compared the dispatch relative to the amount that's scheduled. And that's a very big distinction, in my view, that inflates the performance of the utility DR program. So in other words, the actual ex post analysis should be 20.5 megawatts divided by 33.9 megawatts.
Okay.
Just feedback. You don't need to give a response, but it's just a point a broader point I'd like to make. Thank you. Abigail, I'm happy to repeat that. So I'll start at a higher level. So the performance of utility DR programs tends to be overinflated in my view, and the reason why is because their actual market performance is counted against their amount of capacity that's actually bid, or energy that's bid into the energy market. And so in this instance is 20.5 megawatts versus 23.8 megawatts for PG&E's non-res DA program. Now, what happens is that 86% number is going to be taken and shown and counted against third-party demand response programs who are, unlike utility DR programs, they're required to be shown on supply plans. And then what happens is that the performance of third-party DR programs are then counted relative to their capacity value rather than to the amount of rather than compared to their market schedules. And so that creates an apples and oranges type situation whereby the utilities are automatically going to, utility DR performance is always going to look a lot better than third-party performance. And that's problematic because this discrepancy in how utility versus third-party DR performance is counted has been used over the past several years in the resource adequacy proceeding in order to impose, in my view, discriminatory rules that disfavor third-party DR relative to utility DR. And so I personally, in the council, would like to see a change into how these utility DR performance is reported on and measured. Thank you.
All right, we hear you, Luke. I very much understand where you're coming from, and even in reading the CAISO DMM report, it kind of on DR performance last year, it definitely calls out that difference. So I just letting you know that the DR team here at the commission is very aware of how some of these percentages are calculated, and we do take that into consideration when we are comparing those two programs. So appreciate the comment.
Yep, and thank you, Andrew. And I hope that this can be reflected in the conversation in the current and future resource adequacy proceedings, because unfortunately, that's where the issue is being addressed the most and where it has the greatest detrimental impacts to third-party DR. And so I'm encouraged by what you're saying, but at the same time, you're not the only ones who need to understand that. Thank you.
So sorry about that. Is there any other questions in the chat or for Zhejiang?
We're trying to get Abigail the ability to unmute.
No, it's okay. I think I kind of heard the point that Luke was trying to make, but I just wanted to kind of call out that I you think it should also be acknowledged that if the megawatts are not dispatched, then getting to 100% would be impossible. So maybe it's a matter of just continuing the discussion later on in a different forum.
Yeah, Abby, I imagine here what Luke is talking about is more the fact that the IOUs are able to daily change their nomination capacities, whereas the third-party DR providers are required to keep a supply plan quantity that is fixed. And so
Yeah.
when we go from our nomination to our dispatch down to
Yeah.
the actual ex post analysis on the IOU side, nominations are already artificially lower than maybe what the ex ante award had been previously. And so then therefore the dispatch and ex post values look a higher percentage compared to the ex ante value in the month ahead NQC, whereas on the DR side or the DRP side, you know, if you're comparing it ultimately back to the supply plan quantity, then those values just look lower.
And
so I
to
think,
be honest, it makes it
I know
all,
Luke offered,
it makes it
sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, to be honest, it also makes it very much complicated to do the ex post to have these two different values. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think this analysis is the only LIP one that actually uses CAISO data. All the other ones don't really do that at all. So that makes the CBP analysis somewhat unique.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, if there aren't any more questions, thank you, Zizhuang, for the presentation. It was really great. We will take a short 10-minute break right now. So if everyone could just be back by 10:52, that would be great. All right, see everyone soon.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We'll a minute or two just to get back on the call. If the presenter for the Southern California Edison program could share their screen, I will stop sharing mine.
Can do. Are y'all able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Yeah, just let me know when I should start.
Sure, we'll just give it a minute just in case people are running back.
Yeah, sounds good. I think we're a little ahead of schedule.
Okay, I think you should be good to start now.
Cool. Okay, thank you. So my name's Davis Farr with Demand Side Analytics. I'm a consultant at Demand Side Analytics, and today we are going to be talking through the 2023 evaluation of the Southern California Edison Smart Energy Program. I do not have an agenda slide, but kind of the general flow of things. Going to do a quick rundown of what this program is, how it works, the control mechanism, all that kind of stuff, and then we'll talk through the ex post results and then the ex ante results from 2023, and then we'll kind of do a quick little takeaway slide at the end. But starting here, we can look at kind of an overall description of what the SEP program is. Like I said, it's the Smart Energy Program, and as you may have guessed from that previous slide, or maybe the name of the program, it is a program that centers around smart thermostats, and the way it works is through temporary set point adjustments for smart thermostats for enrolled customers. The idea being that when you change the set point of a thermostat, when you raise it in the summer or maybe lower in the winter, you're going to be lowering AC usage and therefore lowering demand during those hours. This is an event-based program, and events can be called year-round in this program, but customers are only, customers only receive bill credits from June to September. And in my experience, I've only ever seen events actually called in that time. Well, June to September, and I've seen in the past one October event, but those are generally pretty rare. You can see there's a pretty hefty bill credit that are given to customers the first time that they enrolled in SCP at $75, which is definitely very nice for them, along with a 32.75 cent per day bill credit from that June through September window when most of the events tend to get called. Like I said, this is a smart thermostat program, and that the smart thermostat world is made up of many different brands of smart thermostats, kind of smart thermostat OEMs. But this program is kind of ran through two specific vendors that then kind of control different sets of smart thermostat different OEMs smart thermostats. But we're not really going to focus on the vendors and looking at any results by the vendors in this presentation, but that's kind of generally the way that this program works. Those are kind of the implementers of the program. And then if you kind of look on the right, you can see a lot of the different, the different sets of customers that make up the SEP program, right? These are kind of all the numbers that are here are kind of different segments along with the subsegments that make up these segments. And this is looking at what the average numbers were for those segments for all the different events this year, right? There was on average about 68, almost 69,000 participants in the program this year across all of the events, right? And I think there's a bunch of different segments here, but I think some to kind of look at, right? There is a decent amount of care or FARA rate, low income customers that are in this program. The NIM customers, right? That's going to be the solar status. Whether if you're a NIM customer, you typically have solar. If you're not, if you're a non-NIM customer, that you don't. That number has been growing over the years for this program, and as it kind of generally has been. I think another one to look at. This is the second year of this, but that tariff the tariff segment down there as well is made up of both dynamic rate customers and flat rate customers. Dynamic rate customers are customers that are on TOU rates, and obviously that makes up a a pretty large percentage, I think 66%-ish probably of the program now. After the kind of default TOU rate changes, I think that was last year was the first year they did that. So that's kind of a big group of the customers in the SEP program as well. Most of the customers are kind of in the LA Basin area. A lot of them are in the central sublab. Another big group is in the west sublab, and with some smaller in the different geographic regions of the area. But that's kind of the general makeup of the program there. And with that, we'll go kind of starting into our ex post analysis. The first thing, kind of just talking about what events were called during the year. During the 2023 season. You can see here, this is kind of going in reverse chronological order. So the first event of the year is on the bottom and the last event of the year is on the top. The events this year were called from right at the end of June all the way to kind of midway through September. I think one thing to see here, these kind of the lines and dots here represent the hours that the events were called over this year. And I think a thing to point out here is that there's pretty good coverage across the entire RA window. Not any individual event, right? Because there's only the longest event this year was 3 hours, but we do have a good coverage across all of the hours in the RA window. Starting with that 4 to 5 event that was on August 31st, all the way to the 3-hour long event on August 16th, that went all the way until 9 o'clock. So there's good coverage in all the hours. The most common event hour was that 6 to 8 window that was called for 3 hours. That'll kind of come up later on as we talk through some of the average event impacts. It's going to be kind of an average of those 3 events because they covered a similar event window. And then the other interesting thing on this one, I think this was brought up in a presentation earlier today, that there was an event that was called on July 20th of this year that was the only reliability event of the year. And when those are called, they typically don't always start and end on the hour nice and perfectly, but that was the case again this year. It was just a 35-minute event that started, I believe it was 8:01 and ended at 8:36. So when we look at the impacts on that one, they're going to look much smaller than the rest of them because all of our impacts are estimated at the hourly level, and we only have we're only using hourly data when we do our analysis. So there's kind of some muddied impacts in that hour because half the hour was controlled and half of the hour wasn't. So but we'll kind of get into that a little bit more when we look at the by event impacts. So going from there, we'll kind of talk about the overall ex post methodology and kind of the steps that we typically take when we go through and do the SEP ex post analysis, starting with proxy day selection. The first thing that we do is we take the list of our event days and we want to look for days that are similar to those event days based on the SCE system load. So for every event day, we go back and we look for 3 similar event day or 3 similar non-event days, based on their system loads, to do some kind of comparisons, right? Because what our end goal here is to do kind of a difference in difference regression, and choosing those similar days helps with that, and it also helps with doing control groups, right? Because we also utilize matched control groups for this analysis. And the way that we do that is we take our pool of participants in the program and we take a large pool of potential matches for those customers, and we look at their loads on all of the proxy days that we chose in the kind of the first step of this process, trying to utilize the information on these similar days to find customers that are going to provide us with a counterfactual for what our participants would have done on the event days. So we look at the usage on all the proxy days over this whole summer, and to try to find match controls for our participants, right? Every participant is going to have a match control. We do the match controls with replacement. So there are some times when controls will be represented multiple times in our data set if they're the best control for multiple customers, which does happen sometimes. But we also do we do some hard matching as well, so we don't put all the onus on this kind of propensity score matching model that we use, right? We force all the matches for our customers to be matched within NIM status. So we want to make sure that our solar customers get matched with solar customers, our non-solar customers get matched with non-solar customers. They have to be in the same climate zone as each other. They need to be in the same size quartile. So you want your big energy users to be matched with your big energy users and your small ones to be matched with your small ones, along with the tariff rates, right? We want to make sure that the customers that are on TOU rates are matched with the customers on TOU rates, and same thing for flat rate customers, because they tend to, as we'll see later on in this presentation, I have a slide that shows the some kind of reference loads for both of those groups, and they are quite different. So you need to make sure that you help your model out by doing some hard matching before you even send it in to do the propensity score matching. But those are kind of the first two steps, and then our last step for the analysis is doing a difference in differences panel regression. Right, this is one where if you're doing a good enough job matching, you might not even need to do the whole difference in differences thing. You could just do a comparison of your participants and your non-participants, and participants in the match controls on the day of. But doing the difference in differences regression gives us kind of an added level of precision that's helpful, helpful and reassuring to make sure that we're getting good, accurate estimates of the impacts on these event days. And when we do that, we're kind of getting at the hourly event impacts. We're doing across the entire population, which is most of what we're showing today is going to be per customer impacts, across the whole SEP population. But we also do it by all the different subcategories that I mentioned on that first slide that we looked at. So there's lots of different regressions that we run. And then when we're doing that regression, kind of the difference in differences is we include the 3 proxy days, and then we also include the event day, right? So we're getting some information on proxy days and the event day.
We seem to have lost Dave. We'll just give him a chance to join back in the meeting.
I'm so sorry. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm so sorry. My internet just went out for a second there. Let me reshare my screen.
No worries.
What was the last thing that you heard from me in my rambles?
You were just talking about the proxy days and the regression analysis.
Yes, yeah. So we're and kind of thinking about the we have the 3 proxy days and the actual event days in our regression analysis. That's kind of the pool of information that the model is going to see for every event, right, when we're getting our per event impacts. So fingers crossed that the internet doesn't go out again. Looking at this is kind of the results of our matching process here. The figure on the right shows what the loads for both our treatment customers and our control customers look like on average for all the different proxy days that our model has, right? The treatment customers are in blue, while the control customers are the dotted gray line there. In most cases, you can't actually see the dotted gray line, which is great. That's exactly what we're looking for when we do this, right? That means that you're choosing, on average, a set of control customers that are quite similar to your treatment customers, and that's exactly what you want. You want to be able to hopefully use them as that counterfactual on the event day. So this is exactly what you're looking for. Mechanically on our side of things, we kind of we have to assign some characteristics to these control customers just to make sure they're all included in all the correct regressions and the models and all that kind of stuff. Like I said a second ago, we do use replacement. So there are sometimes control customers that are represented multiple times in the control pool, just to make sure that everyone gets the best possible match for them. And then one other piece is, this year there was about 2.5% of our participant customers that were not able to be matched through our matching process. That was either, sometimes there's missing data for the participants either on the event days or the proxy days, or sometimes their usage is just so different from all the rest of the customers that they're not able to get a good match. So we just don't end up using those. Next, here is a look at what the per event impacts ended up looking like this year in 2023. This year, all of the events were called territory wide. I think maybe this has happened before, but sometimes there's 1 or 2 events where one sublap gets left out or something like that. But this year, every event got called territory wide, with only one non-economic event, only one reliability event being called, which is that July 20th event that I highlighted earlier, which, you know, as you kind of like scan across the table there and look at the impacts both on on a per customer level and also on aggregate, much lower than the other ones, like I said, because you're analyzing that 35-minute event. We analyze everything at the hourly level, and because of that, you know, that's a half hour is treated and a half hour is not. You're also dealing with some snapback impacts that happened that probably impacted the, you know, latter half of the hour, and so that's going to always end up with lower impacts. Another thing to point out here, I think this is interesting. Not always the case that a program grows quite steadily over the summer, right? You know, in a lot of years there's, you know, multiple consecutive hot events or something like that tends to, you know, cause customers to de-enroll from the program, right? They get upset if their thermostats get controlled 5 days in a row. You know, fair enough. But that did not happen this summer, right? There was some nice steady growth in enrollment from 66, almost 67,000 in the first event, all the way down to 70,000 in the last event. So, you know, the enrollment was growing quite steadily over the summer. I think another thing to point out about the summer, you know, two things here. First is that this was generally a pretty cool summer. I think that's kind of true of a lot of these programs. You know, a lot of programs weren't dispatched very many times this past summer, but you know, SCP was still dispatched quite a bit, but the temperatures that it was dispatched at was definitely on average lower than, you know, definitely lower than 2022, definitely lower than 2020, you know, maybe similar to 2021, another kind of cooler summer. So, you know, on average, you would expect the impacts to be maybe a little bit lower than you saw last year, but controlling for weather probably going to be pretty similar. Another thing to point out here is the pre-cooling, that pre-cooling comment on the far right, right? Pre-cooling is something that's done with a lot of smart thermostat programs. And it's something that the SCP program has been working to implement over the last few years, and it has been doing so successfully. But I think this maybe was the first year where it was implemented successfully in pretty much every event. I think maybe there was one or two events where a subset of customers were not able to be pre-cooled or anything like that. But for the most part, they were able to implement that pre-cooling, which is helpful for event impacts. You know, when you cool someone's house down before you set their thermostat set point way up, it tends to help with your impacts. It tends to help them not need to use the air conditioner for longer periods of time. But you can also see that the one time that there was no pre-cooling was that reliability event, because, you know, when the program is told when to dispatch, they don't get to, you know, decide when they're going to dispatch. They're not able to really do any planning or do any pre-cooling for those events. So going on from there, kind of drilling down maybe into looking at a couple individual events, or, you know, a couple individual impacts. This is a look at what the impacts looked like for the overall program on a per customer level for the CAISO system peak day on August 16th. You know, pretty strong impacts, right? You know, it was for the summer a relatively hot day, but a relatively cool system peak day, you know, historically. But, you know, up to, you know, little 92.5 degrees at the peak of the day, with, you know, hour one impacts, you know, 1.1 kW per customer, dropping down to about half a kW, and then, you know, quarter of a kW in the hour after that. Typically, that's kind of the degrading impacts that you see hour over hour for a smart thermostat temperature setback program. So not surprising there. The overall average for all those hours was 0.63 kW. But, you know, I would still say this is, considering the temperature, still relatively strong, despite, you know, like I said, this is a relatively cool system peak day. And there, kind of looking at this, the same view, but this is it for the average event day, which I kind of teased a little bit at the beginning of this presentation. This is the average of all of the events in 2023 that had the same event window from 6 to 8. So that's three different events, one in July, one in August, and one in September this year. And, you know, you can see kind of a similar story to the last slide that we looked at. You know, 0.97 kW in the first hour, 0.5 in the second hour. I think it's pretty common, at least over the last few years, for this kind of average event window, which has actually been the same for the last couple of years, to see, you know, 1 kW in the first hour, half kW in the second hour. That's pretty normal. You know, to see that kind of decline, like they had that degradation over time. You can also see, I think this year it's a little bit more clear in the hour ending 18 there, kind of the hour right before the event start, you can see that there was some evidence of pre-cooling, right? Loads increased just a little bit. And then the same thing in the hours following the event, right? Snapback, once you stop controlling and the setback point goes back to what it originally was before the event, the AC is working quite a bit harder, so it's gonna increase the usage compared to normal for these participant customers. But you definitely got some good impacts here on the average days. This is a look at like I was just saying a second ago. For a program like this, the event impact, the per customer impacts in hour one are going to be much higher than in any other hours, right? So the timing of the when you call an event like this for a program like this is very important. This is kind of a zoomed in look of what the load reductions look like for the on that average day, right? So close to 1 in the first hour, about a half in the second hour, and then kind of you get into the snapback from 9 up until midnight there as well, with a little bit of evidence of the pre-cooling in the hour before the event as well. This is a look. This is the one look I think that we're going to have at an individual segment of customers, or two segments of customers here. This is a look at what the two tariff rate groups that we were looking at earlier looks like. So in the gray, you can see what the flat rate customers look like, both their reference loads and the actual observed loads, or the average observed loads on the average event day, as well as the dynamic rate customers. So those TOU rate customers are going to be in blue. The observed loads are going to be the solid lines, and the reference loads are going to be the dotted lines in both cases. But I think it's interesting. You can see the flat rate customers tend to use more energy overall, and this is on a net basis, right? So thinking about just what does the meter see? They tend to use more energy, and at the end of the day, that also does lead to higher impacts for those flat rate customers and the dynamic rate customers, right? In hour one, it looks like about a 1.7 kW impact for the flat rate customers, while the dynamic rate customers only had about a 0.91 kW impact. I think, it's partially because of the extra load, right? The higher loads, if you have more load, there's more load to drop. But I think another thing to point out here is that I thought was interesting was that the flat rate customers are able to be pre-cooled, and the dynamic rate customers are not in this case, right? So the dynamic rate customers are not pre-cooled in the hours before these events, especially if an event starts at 6 o'clock, they're not pre-cooled because that's during their peak rates, right? You don't want to force a customer to use more energy than they typically would during their peak rates. So they don't do the pre-cooling during those hours, but they do for the flat rate customers, right? Because it's not going to make as big of a difference. And when you do that, it tends to mean that there's the difference in the actual loads themselves, but then there's also the different, like the pre-cooling itself also has an effect on the actual hour one impacts as well. So the ability to pre-cool your customers does help the overall impact numbers as well. Here we have a little comparison of the last few years, the average event day for the last couple of years. It's actually been the same window for the last 3 years, which is nice to get a good straight comparison there. You can kind of see what the average reference loads look like for the event hours for the last 3 years, as well as the impacts, the percentage impacts, talking about the event temperatures and all that kind of stuff, which all obviously matters, and the enrollment down there at the bottom. I think kind of some of the interesting thing to see here is the 2023 and the 2021 impacts were pretty similar, on the actual KW basis, but the reference loads were slightly lower in 2023 than they were in 2021, meaning that the percentage impacts were actually higher. And I think part of that is probably going to come down to partially pre-cooling. It's also going to come down to some of the reasons that there's lower reference loads now than there were in 2021, despite similar temperatures, right? The average event temperatures were pretty close between those 2 years. The average heat buildup between those 2 years is pretty close. But the default TOU rates that have happened in the last couple of years has definitely lowered the reference loads in general, which at least by a little bit. But it's good to see that the impacts are actually staying high. There's the percentage impacts are staying pretty high, which I think is a good sign for the program. And I think it's also maybe one of the more important things to take away from the slide too is looking at that bottom row. The program is definitely growing, right? The average the number of customers enrolled during the average event in 2021 was below 50,000. Jumped up to 57,000 last year, and this year was almost up to 70,000. Right, the half the equation when you're thinking about what the aggregate delivery for a program like this is the actual number of customers that are enrolled, and it's great to see that the program is definitely growing. There are a couple reasons for that. We'll kind of go through that a little bit later on in the takeaway slide, but I think that's definitely a good thing. Sorry about that. Need to take a quick swig of water. I think this is the last slide for our ex post analysis here. It's kind of taking a look at the 2023 ex post analysis versus the 2022 ex ante analysis that we did, and to see, compare the numbers and see how we did. So, these tables on the left are all comparisons of the average event days, the days that made up the average event day in 2023 in comparison with the SCE 1 and 2 conditions for those months from the previous year, right? For the ex ante analysis from the previous year. One thing to keep in mind here is that we're at least slightly comparing apples to oranges here. We're talking about, hour 1 through hour 4 of the ex ante analysis is, the hours from 4 to 8, whereas we're actually thinking about the hours from 6 to 8 here. So, the hour of the event is definitely still the most important thing, but the actual hour on the clock does have an effect. So that's something to keep in mind. That it's not going to be a perfect comparison. But on average, looking at the top one, the conditions, the actual event conditions for the event in the ex post analysis this year were a little bit cooler than the 1 and 2 peak day for July from the ex ante the prior year, but the impacts were actually just a little bit higher in hour 1, a little bit lower in hour 2. So it's good to see that there were some strong impacts there. You can see the customer enrollment was actually also quite close to the actual enrollment for the 2023 year, was actually quite close to the projected enrollments from 2022, which is also great to see. I think the SCP team has gotten a pretty good handle on understanding how their program is going to grow over time, which is great for getting accurate assessments of its capabilities in the future. Looking at the next one, the event on August 29th, it's the same. It's a similar story, right? The temperature was pretty close to the August 1 and 2 peak day event or peak day conditions, maybe a little bit warmer, but impacts were a little bit higher in hour 1, a little bit lower in hour 2. And you'll notice, despite slightly different event temperatures between those 2 event days, there were the exact same numbers that we predict, or that we say the impacts in hour 1 were the same between those 2 event days, despite slightly different temperatures. Part of that has to do with the reference loads, and part of that has to do with the heat buildup during that day. I think it was a little bit cooler, or maybe a little bit warmer buildup on the July 27th day than it was on the August 29th day. And then the last one that makes up the kind of average event day, which I think is interesting, is the September 11th event this year. It was actually quite cool compared to the kind of average peaking conditions for a September event, right? The average, kind of looking at the top row there, the average event, the expected average peaking conditions for September is like 92 for over the event window, whereas in this case it was actually like 82 degrees, quite a bit cooler, and the conditions were actually, it's kind of a just interesting comparison. The conditions were actually a little bit closer to a November peaking day, based on the weather conditions for that day. So the event impacts were quite a bit lower than the 1 and 2 peaking conditions for September, the ex post compared to the ex ante from last year. But yeah, like I said, this was quite a cool summer overall. There weren't no event days in 2023 were even close to 1 in 10 weather conditions. So there was lots of comparisons to either 1 and 2 or cooler months 1 and 2s. So all right, moving from there into ex ante. Generally, the way that we do our ex ante, we kind of a couple different kind of pathways that we have to go down the right there. We use actual ex post impacts from past years and this year to inform what we think event impacts will look like in the future. So in this year, we were using event impacts from 2020 all the way through 2023 to build our kind of this little second stage model that we have to predict what event impacts will look like on a per customer basis based on expected future peaking conditions. The reason that we included 2020 this year, in the past, most of the time we've only included 3 years of impacts. This year we included 4 because 2020, as a lot of you know, was quite hot, and having information on how the program performs, even if it's a little bit older, information on how the program performs under those kind of extreme conditions is very valuable. So we thought it would be a good idea to leave those impacts in. That being said, we did weight the impacts a little bit with the more recent information being weighted a little bit higher than the older information, just to make sure that the program has changed over time. We don't want to treat everything like it was happening in 2020 just like it does in 2023, right? 2023 is more important, more indicative of how it's going to affect the future, but having those extreme conditions are very important to building a good model and predicting on extreme 1 in 10 conditions in the future. The other part of this kind of thing that we need to do is we need to estimate the reference loads for all these customers, right? What we do is we use 4 years of load and weather history for customers that are at the end of 2023 still enrolled in the program, right? So we kind of go back and take kind of the historic usage of these customers and estimate their relationship with temperature, outdoor temperature, and use that to estimate what the impacts will look like, or what the reference loads will look like for these groups in the future. And we do this kind of, we aggregate these customers into kind of single, take the average of their usage over all these times, and then we use that to fit a model. We do that for kind of the whole group of SCP customers, as well as several different segments, right? Like we were looking at the beginning of this presentation, we do it by the different LCAs, by the different low income groups. We do it by NIM and sublab and all those kinds of things, so that we're able to show what the ex ante reference loads would look like for all those different groups. The one thing we do drop out of that is we do drop out the COVID affected months from March till December 2022, just to make sure that we're not including that in the reference loads. And then once we combine all those together, along with that gives us our per customer numbers, but along with a forecast of the enrollment in the future, we're able to get up to aggregate numbers as well. And that's what this is looking at here. If we look at the figure on the right, you can see the forecast from the last 4 years, actually, including the years that are included in the model, with the PY 2023 forecast being it's a dotted purple line that's hard to see because it's almost exactly overlaid with the line from last year, which makes sense, right? Like I said a minute ago, the forecast from 2022 actually did a very, very good job estimating what the enrollments were going to be in 2023. So I'm not surprised that the SCP team decided that, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We should probably use the same forecast again in the future if we think that it was already doing a pretty good job. But as you can see, they're also, a little bit lower than what the forecasts were in 2020 or 2021. But it seems like it's kind of on a more realistic trajectory at the moment. So it seems like it was a reasonable choice to use a similar forecast again this year. And as you can see, the line definitely grows over time. It's growing to almost 120,000 participants by 2034, right? Which is going to be very, very helpful for providing large megawatt impacts. Here we're kind of thinking about the actual the second stage model that we ran, and then the data that goes into it. When we think about the actual impacts, right, for any given event hour, there is a relationship between temperature and event impact, or any event hour impacts. But the actual most important predictor for event impacts is going to be the event hour itself, right? So you can see on the image on the left, all of the hour ones are in blue, and all the hour twos are in gray, and then hour threes are in orange. So you can see there is kind of a positive correlation between temperature and any of these dots. But if you kind of split it out by the actual event hour itself, you can see that the highest kW reductions are definitely always in hour 1, and then it kind of goes down to hour 2 and then hour 3. Right. So all that to kind of say is that when we run our model, we allow for there to be a different relationship with temperature. Or there are dummies for each individual event hour, as well as different relationships between temperature and impacts for each event hour as well. Like I said, we run this model for a couple different customer categories, but the main one that we look at most of the time is going to be kind of the whole program look. as well. Here is a look, and this is kind of one of the reasons that we decided to allow the temperature, the relationship between temperature and event impacts vary by event hour, and not just have kind of the dummy in one temperature variable in our model, right? Things do change over time, or by the different event hour, right? There's the relationship between temperature and event impacts is a little bit flatter as you go through the different event hours. As then the same kind of thing is true of the post-event snapback hours, which we also model in our ex ante. And here is a look at what the output of that model is. This is looking at what the for the 2024 average customer under the 1 and 2 conditions on an August peak day, right? We're predicting that for there to be, if you were to call a 5-hour event starting at 4 all the way to 9, you would see about 1.1 kW in the first hour, down to 0.6, down to 0.37. That's kind of typically the way that the per customer impacts grade over time, and this is pretty close to in line. I think it's actually a little bit higher than maybe slightly higher than it was in past years, but it's pretty close to in line with what we've seen in the past as well. So, which is not surprising. We're using fairly similar data as we were in the past to build this model again. And here is a comparison of what the 2022 ex ante looked like compared to the 2023 ex ante. In that table on the left, you can kind of see, looking at all the hours across the RA window in 2023, the first 2 hours, looking at the second and third column is the per customer impact comparison between 2022 and 2023. You can see that the 2023 numbers are slightly higher in hour 1 and hour 2, and then they kind of fall in line with hours 3, 4, 5 after that. And this is all kind of doing the predictions. This is looking at the predictions from 2022 for 2024 and 2023 for 2024. So you can see that the expected enrollment on those days is quite similar. Like I said, not surprising, they used a pretty similar forecast for the enrollment in 2023 as they did in 2022, so not surprising. Then when you look at the aggregate impacts, the expected aggregate impacts for those days, in comparison between the 2 years, it's a little higher in 2023. Makes sense. The per customer impacts are a little bit higher in 2023, and the expected enrollment are a little bit higher in 2023. And when all that number is those two numbers multiplied together, so you're gonna get a little bit higher numbers when you do that. So, and here we have a look at what those kind of ex ante impacts look like at an aggregate level, on the left at an aggregate level, kind of going out into the future, right? That line plot there has the by year and weather scenario, what the impacts are going to look like. On the left, it's going to be the average over all of the RA window, and on the right, it's going to be the just the first hour of the event that we're predicting, right? So by 2024, the program is expected to go up to about 130 megawatt program in the first hour of dispatch, with it being able to deliver about a 55 megawatt impact over the entire RA window. So the program is definitely expected to grow. And then looking at the right, we're kind of looking at what the per customer impacts look like by month of the year. This program does not expect to get any kind of impacts in these winter months, but as the temperatures rise over the summer, you expect to see higher impacts from the program. There's some kind of funny little peaks and valleys across the summer, but this is all these are based off of kind of historic peaking temperatures for all these months. So and some cases, July has the peak, some cases October has the peak. Like the CAISO 1 in 10 conditions, the October peak conditions are a little bit higher than even the September and August conditions. So this program definitely follows the way that the temperatures rise and fall over the year. And then the last slide that we're going to go through here or look at here is the kind of, I think, the overall takeaways from the program for this year. I think like I said a couple times, when you think about the overall ability of a program to deliver megawatts, or the overall program capability, you got to think about what did the per customer impacts look like for the program, and what does the enrollment look like for the program. And and this year I think SCP was quite strong in both, right? 2023 was a pretty mild summer, but the per customer impacts, even on those kind of under those mild weather conditions, they stayed pretty strong. And the ex ante forecast, partially because of those strong 2023 impacts, stayed generally high, and they were higher than the 2022 participant impacts under the same ex ante weather conditions. And so this is kind of thinking about the per customer impact side of that equation. And, we kind of attribute that to a couple of different things. The program staff does compliance reviews for all the customers that are in their program, and they're kind of looking for customers who have offline thermostats, or that are constantly opting out of events, or they're not meeting minimum energy usage thresholds, like they're not living in their house right now, and even though they're enrolled in the program. So that's these are all typically essentially just customers that are not performing very well, and they will do these compliance reviews, and they will take those customers out if they're not meeting these different requirements, which tends to increase the average per customer impacts. And then I think another thing that helped the 2023 impacts was that the program is now very successfully implementing pre-cooling in pretty much all of their events, and pre-cooling effects tend to help hour one, at least hour one, maybe hour two, hour three, for all these events. So I think those two things combined ended up providing pretty strong per customer numbers this year, per customer impact numbers. And then kind of the other side of the equation when thinking about the aggregate megawatts for a program is the actual enrollment. The program enrollment that increased by about 9,000 customers between the end of 2022 and the start of 2023, which is awesome. And then I think even maybe more impressive is that the program actually grew over the summer, where a lot of times you'll see kind of maybe a mix of a little bit of growth and a little bit of decline when there's, like I said, 5 events called in a row. People don't like that. So you have customers enrolling and disenrolling, but this year was just a strong, steady year for growth. And there's a couple, I think the main reason that we've been able to pick up for why that's been happening is that there have been some increased marketing budgets for the SCP program, as well as the program is now allowing CCA customers to enroll as well, which are helping keep enrollments pretty steady and growing, which is great. And if they're able to continue these enrollment numbers, continue growing their enrollment like they have been, or they did this year, that's going to be very, very helpful for their delivery capabilities in the future. I think, that's it. So happy to answer any questions with that. Or not.
Hello.
All right.
Hi.
Hi, I had a question. This is Aisha from SCE.
Yep.
And the question I had was about the participants that couldn't be matched. What were the characteristics that seemed to be like, outliers, or ones that really affected the ability not to match?
That's a great question. I have not done a deep dive into it, so I can't be entirely certain, right? Like I said, I think when we look at this in the past, it's typically been customers that are either really big or really small, or just they're weird in comparison to their peers. So I'd have to go have a look at that and get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Well, not seeing any other questions, I call it a day.
All right. Sounds good.
I'm 90% certain that this is the last presentation. Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming to the second day of the Demand Response Measurement and Evaluation Committee's IOU demand load impact protocol workshop. Please feel free to join us again tomorrow for yet another day. Although tomorrow is going to be the third-party demand response providers that have applied for LIPS in 2024, and there will be, I believe, 7. So it'll be a bit of a longer day tomorrow, but looking forward to seeing all of you tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.